Welcome to the Court of History, the place where politics, law, and history meet to try to understand the crisis that we're going through right now. I'm Sean Wilentz, historian at Princeton University, here with my confrere, Sidney Blumenthal, historian, public figure, advisor to presidents. Sidney's just written a really extraordinary piece in The Guardian regarding what we're going up against in terms of economics, the economic policy that President Trump has followed. And it's really quite amazing how bad the economy has gotten under his watch. In fact, he is, with the big lie that the economy was in bad shape under Biden, he in fact has wrecked the economy pretty much, and he can't do anything about it. Sid, you've talked about how he's stirred up a whirlwind that he cannot shout down. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about why that's the case?
Yeah, well, thanks, Sean. Always glad to be your confrere. Trump is responding with his usual threats to try and ward off the reality that he has created. He's created it himself, and he's done it to himself and to everybody else as well. So while he can send migrants to foreign gulags and tell white shoe law firms that they are now his pro bono serfs or else, he can't order the economy around given what he's done to it. And he's shouting into the wind right now. He's sort of King Canute, trying to stop the tides that he's set into motion. So, and the velocity of the damage is just building. We'll see it in the coming months, particularly beginning in the third quarter. It's not a golf game where he can take mulligans and declare himself the champion. And as I wrote, you can fool all the people some of the time, some of the people all the time, but you can't fool the bond market any of the time. So right. Trump thinks that maybe you can. So he has told the CEO of Walmart, who announced that he has to raise prices in light of Trump's tariffs because tariffs are not paid by the foreign exporters, but by the consumers to whom the price is passed on. He has told him to eat the tariffs, but eat it, in my experience, is not an economic policy.
No, it's a kind of shakedown. Actually, he's telling them, you have to do what I say, or else, right? I mean, this is a shakedown economy that he's worked out, or a shakedown politics, anyway, right?
Well, if you don't do it, I will sick my regulators on you, or I won't lift regulations on you, and maybe you have to pay me some money to my political action committee or to my various scams, my crypto firm, my meme coin scheme. But let's just, and then Moody's, which you can't fool with, said reduce the credit rating for the first time of the United States as a result of what he did.
Right.
And he sent out some underling from the communications department to attack Moody's credibility and blaming, of course, Joe Biden.
Right. The blame for everything. So tell us a little bit, though, just to fill people in, about how the tariff policy really is rebounding to kill the economy, really.
All right, let's go through just some of the numbers here, because we are dealing with the dismal science of economics.
Right.
So Trump announced a 90-day pause on tariffs, or initially announced 145% increase in tariffs on China. He created an idiot board on Liberation Day based on trade deficits with crazy calculations that he got from his lunatic advisor, Peter Navarro, who's out of prison now, who talked himself into prison during the January 6th business. So let's go through the numbers. Nearly 90% of American small businesses rely on imported goods. And more than 20% of U.S. agriculture depends on exporting its products. And U.S. manufacturers rely on imports for more than 20% of machinery, products, and components. And more than 41 million American jobs are linked to imports and exports. And that doesn't include the multiplier effect down to the, delivery boys in the restaurants and so on.
Right.
So what Trump has done is several things. By jerking around the tariff numbers, he has severely distorted the supply chain so that by May 9th, which was just a month after his Liberation Day, 0 cargo ships were departing from China to the United States, to the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, their destinations. The trucking industry is headed towards a recession or depression. The auto industry has given up sending guidance to its investors. So here's the other factor. It's called the uncertainty factor. And what Trump has done by jerking everything around constantly is that he has frozen all corporate planning.
Right.
As it happens, it's not just top-down Stalinist 5-year plans that have planning. All of American business has planning. Otherwise, you can't have prices and wages and hiring and inventory and anything. So the result of no planning means that right now, in this last quarter, people piled up their inventories in anticipation of the tariffs cutting imports. And that means that they're going to run out and there are going to be shortages. And so no one can now predictably figure out what they're going to produce, when, who to order from, or what, or who to hire, or what to do. So everything has frozen. And Trump's response is to shout,
Right.
and to beg, and to attempt to intimidate. He's called critics scoundrels and frauds. But like Walmart, they all face the Hobson's choice of either pricing themselves out of their markets or absorbing the costs and going bust, and especially small businesses.
And the result is, I mean, you and I are old enough to remember what it was like in the 1970s after the oil shock in the early 1973, 74. The result is what we call stagflation. And that's what we're entering into almost inevitably. And that is a terrible, terrible thing that we thought we'd conquered. But apparently he's just determined to throw us back into that. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Well, this is really interesting because Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, said we're headed into stagflation. And we are. It's a very unusual situation where you have both inflation and stagnation at the same time.
Right.
It happened in the 70s, but that was the result of what's called an exogenous factor, an external factor, the OPEC oil shock.
Right.
This is, and since then, there has been no stagflation. We got through it. We went through the Fed raising interest rates to an extraordinarily high, painful level. It led to the defeat of Jimmy Carter. It led to the election of Ronald Reagan. And it wasn't really until near the mid-'80s that we got over that stagflation cycle.
Right.
And we haven't been in it since. This is self-imposed by Trump. This is self-induced, not by an external shock, but by Trump himself as a result of his own delusion and obsession about tariffs, which no economist of any credibility believes in. So all this has been foreseeable. It's not a case of unintended consequences like the 70s, which was a real shock.
Mm-hmm.
But here the red lights were flashing. Trump raced through them, and the consequences cannot be reversed of what he's already done. We are where we are. We're not back where we were even 4 months ago, with poor Joe Biden leaving office, and The Economist magazine running its cover that the United States was the envy of the world, and Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, declaring that we were about to actually execute the soft landing of low inflation, high employment, and stable and continuous growth. That's over. Trump has ruined that scenario.
But let me just ask one last thing, though, because how much of this is just a matter of incompetence or stupid ideology or whatever? We all know about how ideological factors can ruin an economy, but how much of this is just about the Trump shakedown? I mean, that all of his policies seem to be, whether it's the law firms or the universities or the tariffs for that matter, seem to be based on the idea that he wants to seize enough power so that he can shake people down like a mafia boss. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Well, we now know that he's the one who raised the idea with Qatar of getting the $400 million plane, according to CNN. So right. You tell me if it's a shakedown, yeah. Or if he's grifting. Look, Trump has no real policies. When I worked in the Clinton White House, policy was the lingua franca. You had to be able to have a real mastery of policy to be able to enter into any meeting. But here there's no analysis, there's no expertise is anathema in the Trump White House. Anyone who's an expert in the federal government is being riffed. They're being fired. There's no peer review. He's brought in the nuts, Peter Navarro, Laura Loomer, and there's a psychological factor as well as a mercenary factor, and that's that Trump has omnipotence, or he thinks he does, when he introduces uncertainty. So to some extent, it doesn't matter whether tariffs are up or down, as long as it's uncertain and people are looking to him, and he has no limitation on his impulses.
Right.
So the more unpredictable he is, the more he thinks of himself and thinks others think of himself as the Almighty.
Right.
So there's a psychological malignancy to what's going on as well. And there's also another political one, Sean, that involves the Republican Congress. Think about this. In 1981, I interviewed David Stockman. I was writing for the New York Times Magazine. And David Stockman was the bright young man of the Reagan administration who was installed as the budget director. And Reagan was going to implement supply-side economics, by which cutting taxes would lead to increased revenues. And Stockman told me that was basically a Trojan horse and a complete fraud. And he had ceased to believe in this mythology. And as it turned out, supply-side economics was nothing but what George H.W. Bush had called voodoo economics.
Right.
And since then, except for Arthur Laffer, the father of supply-side economics, no one has had the nerve or the pretense to defend it. So they're just ramming it through in the big, beautiful bill in the Republican Congress as a big tax giveaway to the upper bracket and screwing everybody else.
Right.
And along the way, the collateral damage includes Trump's base, many of whom in rural areas are on Medicaid. And they're going to cut Medicaid in order to pay Elon Musk off with tax benefits. More,
right.
That's the formula. And supply side economics, no one believes in that anymore. But here's the other thing: what the Democrats did was attempt to introduce a bill into the House that Trump's basis for his wild tariffs were not legal, because they're based on a national security emergency that does not exist.
Right.
Yeah, just like his national security emergency for dealing with migrants.
Yeah.
He requires emergencies to make himself the dictator, or as he has been called, the unitary executive in the conservative legal theory. So the Democrats introduce a bill to get rid of that emergency, and the Republicans in the Rules Committee tabled it. So there was no vote, no debate, a disappearing act, but they're on the hook for the midterms, which may be an eon from now, but will happen. And by that time, the consequences will well have set in, and the Trump base, among everybody else, will have been betrayed by Trump's campaign promise that he would reduce inflation.
Yeah, and so the chaos leads to betrayal, but chaos also feeds despotism, which is psychological but also political. Let's leave it there for now, Sid. We're going to talk about this a lot more, but let's conclude for now for the Court of History. See you next time.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.